came home slightly tipsy with my dress inside out and said I had been trying on bras with my friends, but none of them fit me. Times were tough, and we bought bras from black market sellers back then. I never cheated. But my ex-husband did, with a girl he had dated before me. In the second year of our marriage, she called me and suggested we meet. It's worth noting that she was frail, delicate, and very fragile back then. And I was still working as a stunt woman. I went out to meet her, and she told me that when I called my husband last night and couldn't reach him, he was with her, and they spent time together. I raised an eyebrow and suggested she start running while I counted to 3. She hurriedly said there wouldn't be any continuation, and she wouldn't let my husband visit her again. She just needed it to be that way, so it seemed like she left him, not the other way around. Wow, this is like a soap opera, I thought, and went home to wait for my husband. I found my second ex-husband's chats in the archives of the computer on the C drive. He forgot to delete them. I was looking for them intentionally because I started to suspect something, and I found them, of course. It was back in the days of ICQ. I asked him directly what it meant. He dodged the question at first, then admitted it. We separated. What bothered me the most was that in those messages, he called me my cow, even though I never weighed more than 52 kilo. At least he could have called me a goat or something, but a cow. He didn't end up with that woman either, though they did manage to have a child while we were still married. Well, we got divorced, and things fell apart for them too. Now she has a new family, an abusive husband, another child, and my second ex is still alone. I think it's fair. And what if you open the door to a room and find your guy with another girl? How do you handle that? Personally, I either didn't hide it or didn't get caught. Deny everything works well. Once I had an affair with a married guy. Well, not really an affair, just weekly meetings, completely silent. In public, we were friends with our families. One day, his wife started complaining about him, saying he seemed lazy. And I said, but he's smart, kind, generous, and a great lover. I started sweating and added, so they say. His wife didn't react, and they are still together. Classic, talking in my sleep. I didn't cheat, but others cheated with me. I lived in the Moscow suburbs. My lover lived in Moscow, and we both worked in Roitov, halfway between my village and the Kursk railway station. I worked at NPO Mashinostrenia, a huge military plant, and he worked in a small photo studio where he was the only employee. I sat in a huge hall. Half of it was occupied by our department, 20 people, and the other half, behind columns, by the neighboring department, another 20 people. It turned out that a friend of his wife worked in the neighboring department, who somehow figured me out and tracked me down. After work, I quietly went to the photo studio and waited in the back room until closing time. I don't even know. Maybe I had something written on my forehead? My grandmother, when she returned from evacuation in '43, having buried one of her 2 daughters, found her husband in bed with the nanny of their children. Grandma said, "I'm back," and threw the nanny out the door in whatever she was wearing. What she said to her husband next, history doesn't tell. I had an affair with a married man. Everything was nice, beautiful, expensive, tasteful, like in the movies. As always, he said he had no relationship with his wife, had long fallen out of love, and so on. Despite the lack of relationship, they had a 3rd child. Well, alas, I believed him. We eventually broke up, of course. The outcome of such affairs is predetermined in 90% of cases. I lived as if nothing had happened for a couple of months. And then I got an email from his wife. She wrote that she couldn't take it anymore, that they had separated, and that I could take him and live happily ever after, and she had no claims. I, of course, replied that we hadn't been in touch for a long time and so on, but never during this affair or after it did. I feel as awful, disgusting, and hurt as I did while reading that email. Why? Because as I suddenly realized that my tears, my nerves, the encrypted messages, the missed calls, everything I did for the sake of someone else's family, was all for nothing. All my pain, my tears, my wounded pride were in vain.
They eventually divorced. In short, never again. So, briefly, the girl had been with the guy for many years, and he earned wealth, which she happily took advantage of. Every year they went to a festival on an imaginary Ibiza, had fun, and enjoyed themselves. One year, she somehow spent significantly more money at the guy's expense. There, on this imaginary Ibiza, they met mutual friends who weren't planning to go due to financial difficulties. It later turned out that the girl had taken her new lover and his friends there at the guy's expense and had a great time, ultimately leaving the guy alone on this imaginary Ibiza, not forgetting to take some cash with her. Just to have something to live on. My husband once had an affair with a girl of Korean descent. It didn't go beyond flirtation, but I figured it out very simply. We were standing in line at a store and there was an Asian-looking girl ahead of us. I noticed my husband was looking at her intently. At home, I checked his social networks on the computer. He didn't know how to hide. My previous boyfriend was very straightforward. The funniest part is that I was constantly meeting up with his friend and even went to visit him in Maloyaroslavets. But to all suspicions, I would say, "Are you crazy? Sasha and I are friends. How could you even think that?" In my youth, I was bisexual for some time. With my girlfriends, I never had such relationships that would be considered cheating. It was more like deepened friendship. But one of my friends was married. Her husband caught us almost in bed. He skipped a class and came back earlier than expected. So if you didn't know about our inclinations, you could have thought it was just neutral hugging. But he obviously knew everything, at least about his wife. She later told me that he wasn't jealous of girls. That time, he didn't say anything. He pretended he didn't understand. But from that day, he started making advances towards me. Maybe it was some kind of closure for him, but I just didn't know how to act with him. My conscience wouldn't allow me to deceive my friend with another girl easily, but with her husband, it seemed like a completely different matter. On the other hand, wasn't she doing the same thing? So why not? By himself, he kind of liked me, and all else being equal, I probably would have given in. In general, I was completely confused and didn't know what to do. In the end, I suggested that the three of us be together, him, his wife, and me. That way, ethical problems of this kind wouldn't arise. But then he got embarrassed. Either he wanted to prove something to himself, or it was just beyond his acceptable limits. I had the feeling that he might have agreed later, but we didn't have enough time. They left, and, as it later turned out, for good. A couple of years ago, I found out that they still live together, apparently with kids. I had an affair, and someone clearly saw us and sent my husband an anonymous email from a temporary address. In the email, this person was named as my colleague at work, though he hadn't been for 2 years, and there was nothing else specific. I convinced my husband it was a joke. The anonymous sender never appeared again, but it was very scary. My husband went on a business trip. I went to a role-playing game. I loved my husband, but I couldn't resist a handsome, gallant, and charming man. My husband returned. By that time, the affair was over. It started just for the sake of flirting with a pleasant person. We all lived in one apartment together, apparently. It started coming out in jokes. For me, just flirting was always under safe conditions, like just a good dinner, just pleasant, and that's it. Cheating began where there was emotional involvement, support, a shoulder, not in the physical aspect. One day, my husband simply asked, "Did you go out with Kay?" Looking at him with honest and loving eyes, I said, "Yes, so what?" By the time I explained, I had already been feeling extremely guilty for a month and a half, and by the time my husband returned from his business trip, 2 weeks, I was on the edge and counting the hours until his return. When he came back, I threw myself into his arms. A few days after my explanation, my husband left. I cried the whole autumn, treated my nerves, was very distressed and almost fell into depression. I caught my husband classically. Suddenly new things appeared. He started taking care of himself on time and stayed late at work. I came to his work in the evening, but he wasn't there. However, on his work computer, which didn't require any login or password, was all the correspondence. That's how we got divorced. A mutual friend wrote to me about my boyfriend, saying he secretly went to clubs. I was terribly shocked by such revelations. Then she wrote that he had a date instead of dance classes, but he was actually at the dance that day. They photographed everyone in honor of the holiday. I never understood whether she got something wrong or was lying terribly, but I stopped talking to her. A friend was cheating on her husband. She came back after meeting with another person, and her husband wanted to hug her and all that. She felt awkward and said she would take a shower first. And it's a good thing she did. Her unreliable lover had left an unpleasant surprise in a certain place.